I was just about to inject myself with my insulin pen when I heard a commotion nearby. I looked up and saw a woman, Karen, and her friend walking towards me. Little did I know this encounter would turn into a nightmare. Here's how it all went down. I was sitting on a bench in the park, enjoying the warmth of the sun on my face. It was a beautiful day and I had decided to take a break from work to get some fresh air. I had my insulin pen with me as always. Being a diabetic, I needed to take my insulin regularly to stay healthy. As I was about to inject myself, I heard a commotion nearby. I looked up and saw a woman, Karen, and her friend walking towards me. They were talking loudly and seemed to be in a heated argument. As they got closer, I tried to ignore them and focus on my insulin injection. But Karen spotted me and zeroed in on my insulin pen. "What is that? Are you carrying around a graffiti marker?" she exclaimed, pointing at my insulin pen. I was taken aback by her accusation. "No, it's an insulin pen. I'm diabetic and I need it to survive," I explained calmly. But Karen was having none of it. She snatched the insulin pen from my hand and examined it closely. "This is definitely a graffiti marker. You're carrying it around illegally and I won't stand for it," she declared, before breaking the pen in half. I was shocked and angry. How could someone be so ignorant and rude? I tried to explain to Karen what she had just done, but she refused to listen. She started accusing me of being a graffiti artist and a criminal, and her friend chimed in, supporting her. I felt helpless and embarrassed as more people gathered around, taking Karen's side. My heart was racing, and I could feel my blood sugar dropping. I tried to explain to Karen what she had just done, but she refused to listen. "I'm telling you, it's an insulin pen. Look, it has a needle on it," I said, pointing to the broken pen. Karen scoffed. "That's what they want you to think." "I know what I saw," she said, shaking her head. I couldn't believe it. How could someone be so ignorant and rude? I felt helpless and embarrassed as more people gathered around taking Karen's side. "Excuse me, miss, but I think you're mistaken. I'm a nurse and that's definitely an insulin pen," a woman said, stepping forward from the crowd. Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, another one of you diabetes freaks," she muttered. I was grateful for the woman's support, but I knew it wasn't enough. I needed to get my insulin injection soon, or my blood sugar would drop dangerously low. "Please, just give me back my pen. I need it to live," I pleaded with Karen. She hesitated for a moment before tossing the broken pieces of the pen on the ground. "Fine, take your stupid graffiti marker and get out of here," she said, before walking away with her friend. I picked up the broken pieces of my insulin pen, feeling defeated and angry. I couldn't believe someone could be so ignorant and rude, and I knew I needed to do something about it. I took a deep breath and tried to compose myself. This was not the first time I had encountered someone like Karen. People who were ignorant and rude about my diabetes always seemed to find me, no matter where I went. But today was different. Today, Karen had crossed a line. She had broken my insulin pen, the one thing that kept me alive. And she had done it without a second thought, without any consideration for the consequences. I looked around at the crowd that had gathered, feeling their eyes on me. I knew what I had to do. I had to stand up for myself, for all the diabetics out there who had been belittled and mistreated by people like Karen. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, clearing my throat. "I need to say something." The crowd fell silent, and I took a deep breath before continuing. "I am a diabetic. I need insulin to survive. This," I said, holding up the broken pieces of my insulin pen, "is not a graffiti marker. It is a medical device that I depend on every day to stay alive." Karen scoffed and muttered something under her breath, but I ignored her. I don't know why people like her feel the need to belittle and mistreat people like me. We are not criminals. We are not freaks. We are human beings who just happen to have a medical condition, and we deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, just like everyone else. The crowd murmured in agreement, and I felt a surge of confidence. I wasn't alone in this. There were people out there who understood and supported me. "Karen, I don't know what your problem is. I don't know why you feel the need to make assumptions and break other people's belongings, but I want you to know that what you did today was not okay. You could have hurt me. You could have put my life in danger. And for what? Because you thought my insulin pen was a graffiti marker? That's ridiculous." Karen opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't let her. "I want you to apologize. I want you to admit that you were wrong and that you made a mistake. And I want you to promise me that you will never do something like this again." Karen looked around at the crowd, and for a moment I knew that she was going to refuse, and she actually did. Instead of apologizing to me, she walked away, earning a few gasps from the crowd as she did so. I sighed, disappointed but not surprised. At least a few people came forward and apologized to me. I then took a deep breath and felt the adrenaline slowly leaving my body. The crowd had dispersed, and Karen was nowhere to be seen. I sat down on the bench, feeling exhausted and drained. I looked at the broken pieces of my insulin pen, still in my hand. I knew I needed to get a new one soon, but for now, I just needed to rest. As I sat there, a woman approached me. "Excuse me," she said. "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for what happened. That was really awful, and I can't believe someone would do something like that." I smiled weakly at her. Thank you, I appreciate that. She sat down next to me on the bench. My son is diabetic too, she said, so I know how important that insulin pen is to you. I can't imagine what it must have been like to have it broken like that. I nodded, feeling grateful for her understanding. It was really scary. I didn't know what to do. Well, I'm just glad you're okay, she said. Is there anything I can do to help? I thought for a moment. Actually, there is. Do you know where the nearest pharmacy is? I need to get a new insulin pen as soon as possible. She nodded. Yeah, there's one just a few blocks from here. I can take you there if you want. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Thank you so much. That would be amazing. We got up from the bench and started walking towards the pharmacy. As we walked, she asked me about my diabetes and how I managed it. We talked about different insulin pens and pumps, and she shared some tips and tricks for managing blood sugar levels. By the time we got to the pharmacy, I felt like I had made a new friend. I thanked her and went inside to get my new insulin pen. The pharmacist was sympathetic and understanding, and she gave me a discount on the replacement pen. I left the pharmacy feeling grateful and relieved. As I walked back to my apartment, I thought about what had happened. It had been a scary and stressful experience, but it had also shown me that there were good people out there who were willing to help. I felt stronger and more resilient than ever before. Wow, what a wild ride. Can't believe someone would mistake an insulin pen for a graffiti marker. But I'm glad they stood up for themselves and got the support they deserved. Also, kudos to the woman who helped them out at the end. It's always heartening to see people come together to help each other out. So this was a few years ago. I, 28F at the time, met my roommate, 28F, on Facebook, we'll call her Brandy, in the marketplace section. My first mistake. I was struggling to find a place and found this apartment that was close to my work and within my price range. Brandy had lived in the apartment for a couple of years already and was looking for someone to split the cost of rent since it had gone up. We seemed to hit it off initially, and after seeing the apartment in person, I agreed to co-lease with her and split the cost of utilities. I'm gonna be honest, I was 90% sure this would be fine, but that remaining 10% was the part of me saying, it's fine now but something is slightly off about her. I really should have listened to that 10%. Let me paint you a brief picture of Brandy. She came from a lower upper-class family, so she was relatively well off. She was somewhat down to earth, but sometimes her ignorance and entitlement showed through very clearly. One example of her ignorance was when she once commented on how the water in her boyfriend's apartment, first floor in a building on the bottom of the hill we lived on, always seemed to get hotter faster than the hot water in our apartment, third floor in a building at the top of the hill we lived on. I kind of shrugged it off, until she proceeded to say that it was because it took the hot water longer to travel up to our apartment. I immediately did a double take and asked her to clarify. Did she mean travel from the lower floor in our building to our floor? No, she said. From the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill where our apartment was. I tried explaining to her that that's not how hot water works, but she kept insisting that it was, so I just dropped it. Once Brandy had made up her mind that she was right, there was absolutely no changing it, no matter how much information you presented. Another time, her boyfriend got her a very lovely arrangement of red, pink, and purple roses for Valentine's Day. Now, if you've ever ordered flowers, especially for Valentine's Day, you'll know that they can get expensive. And this was a very full bouquet, so it must have been easily $100, $150. I came home and commented on how beautiful they were and how sweet it was that he got her flowers. She scoffed and said, yeah, but they look like the standard cheap arrangement you could get anywhere. I'm making him buy me new ones. I was so shocked, all I could really say was, oh, and walk over to my room. So on to the main story I came to tell here. When I moved in, Brandy said she would pay the bills for utilities since they were already in her name, and just asked that I Venmo my half to her. She'd send me an itemized breakdown every month in the form of a funds request in Venmo, and I would just pay her my half. I guess, in hindsight, it was a really naive thing to do, but I agreed. So one day, I came home from work when she was getting the internet set up at the apartment. When I moved in, I asked for the password to the Wi-Fi, and she sent me a screenshot of a router with a long-generated password, then mentioned she was getting it set up later that week. I thought that was odd, but I thought maybe she was setting up a specific Wi-Fi just for her work. So when the technician gave her the password, I, of course, asked for it. She froze for a moment like she was contemplating if she should. Then I asked, or am I supposed to just use the original one you gave me? Like, is this one separate? She quickly said, yes, just keep using that one. I didn't think anything of it and agreed. For the next 4 months, I continued to pay my half for the Wi-Fi without another thought. I did think it was strange that sometimes I would plug my Amazon Fire TV into the TV in the living room and it would buffer a lot. But when she would use her Apple TV, the connection was always smooth. I didn't get an answer until one day, my boyfriend, we'll call him Mark, was over. We were hanging out in the living room when my roommate wasn't home and wanted to connect his Nintendo Switch to the Wi-Fi. I gave him the password and he immediately pointed out that the signal wasn't very strong. He asked where the router was and I showed him the one she had set up. He told me it wasn't the same router since the picture of the password Brandy had given me was of a Verizon router, and the one in the apartment was Charter. We looked for the Verizon one but couldn't find it in the apartment, so Mark followed the signal on his Switch until he had full bars. We quickly realized that he had a full signal when he was standing in front of our neighbor's door across the hall from us. I then texted my roommate, pretending I'd lost the screenshot of the Wi-Fi password she'd sent me months ago, and asked for her to send it to me again. Instead, she sent me the login and router details for the Charter Wi-Fi in our apartment. It was confirmed. She had been charging me for Wi-Fi for 4 months and having me steal Wi-Fi from our neighbor Ben across the hall. I confronted Brandy about it, and she feigned ignorance, saying that she didn't remember telling me not to use the Wi-Fi in our apartment, even though I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt she had. When I told her that it wasn't fair to me or to Ben that she had done this, she retorted with, "It's fine. Ben owed me money for something, so it works out." I pointed out that any money issues between her and Ben had nothing to do with me, and that she had lied and stolen $140 from me over the course of the past several months. She insisted that she did nothing wrong, and that she didn't owe me anything. I was afraid that she would try to kick me out, although I wasn't aware at the time that I couldn't be, since I had co-signed the lease. I had been homeless for a year prior, struggling to find an apartment in a safe neighborhood I could afford due to my low-paying job. This was the first place that was both in my budget and a safe neighborhood. And at the time, I couldn't move in with my boyfriend because he didn't make much at the time and lived in a shoebox-sized studio apartment, so I let it go and didn't say anything about it for nearly a year. I ended up getting it back when I moved out because, surprise, surprise, we'd had a huge fight, and she told me to move out of her apartment. So Brandy and I continued living with each other for the next several months. We remained cordial to one another and mostly stayed out of each other's way. This was relatively easy since the last few months I lived there. She practically lived at her boyfriend's apartment down the hill from where our apartment building was. See the hot water story from my original post if you want a good laugh about how she thought plumbing worked. So during the pandemic, I started struggling with the loneliness that comes with social distancing. I was really depressed, and one of the main things keeping me going on days I felt especially lonely was the cat that my roommate had. I've had animals pretty much my whole life, and their company can really fill that empty space for companionship that I need. However, as Brandy started spending more time at her boyfriend's apartment, she started taking the cat with her. Those days were hard, however, because it was her cat and not mine. I never asked her to leave him with me, even though I was really struggling. So I started thinking about getting a cat for myself. I've introduced cats into new spaces and social situations several times before, so I felt confident that I could do that here. I thought it over for a while because I didn't want to get a new cat only to start going back to work and leave it alone 90% of the time. I also wanted to make sure I was ready for the lifelong commitment that comes with having a pet. So anyways, I decided to get a cat. I approached Brandy to talk it over with her. At first, she seemed open to the prospect, but then suddenly, she wasn't. She told me, no, as if I were a child asking a parent for something. I was so frustrated because I owned the apartment just as much as she did, and had always been more than considerate with her. I approached her to discuss it one more time, and she started telling me how she didn't want another animal in her apartment because her cat already lived there. Here are the reasons she gave. First, cats can't share litter boxes, so that's going to be an issue. Anyone who owns cats knows that they can and do all of the time. Second, well, it's going to scratch up my couch and rug. Her own cat already did that frequently, and she had to put protective covers on the couch for that reason. I explained that I would be happy to meet her halfway. I'll pay for better quality couch covers than the ones she already had, and replace the rug with a different one if she was that concerned about it. Third, finally, her Hail Mary attempt was, well, the day you bring another cat into this apartment, I'm going to put my couch in storage, and you'll have to put something else there if you want to sit in the living room. I calmly explained that I didn't move in with her for the couch. I moved in for a place to live. I told her I'd be fine coming up with an alternative solution for the couch. However, at this point I was not asking her, I was telling her. She was not happy with this and accused me of holding back on telling her I was getting a cat until after we renewed our lease. I explained that I had not decided to get a cat until my job announced that we would all be working from home for at least another 6 months, which was several weeks after we'd renewed our lease. I also told her that even though I wanted to adopt an older cat or a bonded pair, I felt it would be easier to just get one kitten because kittens are usually easier to introduce into new environments and new cats. I was trying my best to compromise with her. She finally gave in and accepted that I was getting a cat. Surprise, surprise, she did not remove the couch, despite her threats. When I finally found a kitten to take home, I let Brandy know when I'd be taking her home, so she would know. I gave her the plan I was following from an online pet journal, so she would know how this was going to go. The day arrived and I brought my new kitten home. I brought the kitten into my room, which was ready with toys, food, and a new scratching pad. I left her in there to curiously explore with my boyfriend supervising. Brandy asked when her cat and mine were going to meet. I reiterated that they weren't meeting that day because my kitten needed a few days to acclimate to the room and recognize it as her safe space. My roommate practically blew a fuse and started yelling at me that I wasted her time and that I should have explained that. I reminded her that I did explain in my text messages and that I sent her the plan I was going to follow so she could see it for herself. She said, "I'm not going to read all of that text. That's like a novel." It wasn't. It was a few paragraphs tops. I told her it was her own fault for not reading it and that I had done everything I could to prepare her. We had also had a few in-person conversations about it, but apparently she didn't remember those either. She then started yelling at me about how I was a terrible roommate and how all I did was lock myself in my room with my boyfriend all of the time, and now I'm just going to do that with the kitten too. She then started complaining about other things I was doing that upset her. She accused me of never cleaning around the apartment. I cleaned my own bathroom, bedroom, and cleaned up after myself in the kitchen. I reminded her that I offered to work on some sort of cleaning schedule with her when I first moved in. However, she had told me she had a certain way she liked things, and that she would just do it all herself. I continually checked in with her while I lived there, but she kept saying not to worry about it. Now, all of a sudden, it was an issue. She then grabbed our full bin of recyclables, picking things out that were mine and started throwing them on the floor, telling me I never emptied the recyclables. I did. And how I left so much stuff in there and sometimes that she'd have to make multiple trips down to the dumpster to empty it. I am likely in the wrong for this next comment, but here goes. I told her I never complained when I had to make multiple trips because of how much alcohol she drank every week, and that I didn't exactly enjoy living with an alcoholic roommate. She's often filled a recycling bin by the end of the week, all on her own with just bottles of beer and wine. That did it. She screamed, "I want you out of my apartment." I reminded her that I lived there too, and she couldn't just kick me out. I told her she treated me like a house guest, not a roommate. We yelled back and forth some more before she finally left the apartment and I went back to my room. I burst into tears and my boyfriend comforted me. I no longer felt safe or responsible having a new kitten in the apartment. And to be honest, I wasn't sure if Brandy could kick me out or not. I had never co-signed a lease with someone before. I thought about it all and talked it over with my boyfriend for the next several hours. His apartment didn't allow animals, so that was a non-starter. And ended up taking the kitten back to the home we had gotten her from. I cried the whole way there. I said goodbye and gave them the pet carrier I had bought to transport her in, so she'd have something familiar to go home in when someone else took her home. I cried for the next few days. She was such a sweet kitten, and I wish I'd gotten to know her, but I'm sure she ended up in a much better living situation. I installed a doorknob with a lock and key in my door that weekend and was the only person with a key. I no longer felt safe in my apartment unless my door was locked. I spent almost all of my time in my bedroom when I wasn't working at the desk in the public space in our dining and living room area. If she was at the apartment, I was usually at my boyfriend's. Finally, I called the apartment complex and asked if Brandy was actually able to remove me from the lease like she had threatened. They confirmed that we co-leased together, meaning that neither could kick the other one out, so at least I still had a place to live. She started being more cold and passive-aggressive. Her next thing was demanding I pay her my half of the security deposit. When I moved in, I immediately asked what my half was, and she said, "I'm probably not getting the security deposit back for this place, so don't worry about it." Now she was insisting. I told her I would only give it to our apartment complex because I didn't trust her to not keep the money out of spite, especially considering how she'd handled the issue with the Wi-Fi. She kept insisting I pay her, but I held my ground, and eventually, she gave up. I was destructive when I lived there. If anything, her cat was more likely to destroy something. He'd frequently eaten any food I left unsupervised for less than 10 minutes. Once, he took the thick plastic cover off of a rotisserie chicken that was supposed to last me a week because he wanted it, torn lampshades, and had even torn down a canopy I had installed over my bed twice. She never reimbursed me for any of the damage he did to my property, saying, "I told you I was getting a cat when you moved in. It's your responsibility because you knew this might happen." Yeah, she was a real peach. Finally, I found out that since I was only a co-lease, I could leave whenever without being penalized for it financially from the apartment complex. My boyfriend asked if I would get an apartment with him, and I agreed. We started looking for places and eventually found somewhere with decent space for the two of us. The first apartment we wanted wasn't ready until the second week of the following month, though, so we went with a better option that compromised for everyone. There was another unit that was available the third week of the month we were in, meaning I would be leaving earlier than I expected. However, it would be easier for Brandy, who was already planning on moving her boyfriend in that same week. I decided not to ask for reimbursement for fourth week of rent because I figured that would be petty. Despite everything that had happened, I just wanted to leave as peacefully as possible and put the whole thing behind me. We got approved for the apartment and began making plans to move. However, do you think it was that easy? No, of course not. Brandy was a menace to live with. The last month I lived there was during a heat wave, and the air conditioning worked well in the rest of the apartment but not in my room. Maintenance came over multiple times and kept telling me it was fine, but I really couldn't cool down my room without keeping the AC on high. This was absolutely my fault, and I ran up the gas bill very high that month, like 2x what we normally spent. Brandy sent me a text with the bill and was furious. I apologized and took full responsibility. However, she said that because she had spent most of the past month at her boyfriend's apartment, I should pay the full bill. I lost it. I'd put up with this woman's temper tantrums for a full year and was not about to pay 4x what I normally paid simply because she was acting like a Karen demanding a free 4-course meal because her dish wasn't hot enough. I finally put my foot down and told her no. I told her I would gladly pay for the difference in cost. She'd pay what she would normally pay, and I'd pay what I would normally pay plus the amount that was over our usual balance. However, she didn't get a free pass on utilities simply because she decided to live at her boyfriend's for a month. What next? I pay for the full rent of the apartment? She told me I was being unreasonable, and that the day I moved out, she would send me one final itemized payment request on Venmo for the full amount of the gas bill, plus all other utilities and the cost of rent. I shot back with, okay, since we're penny pinching, if you do that, I will send you back the amount you requested, minus the 4 months of Wi-Fi you wrongfully charged me and never paid back, and the last week of rent. I won't be living in the apartment, and I will itemize it so you can see everything. She did not take that well. She told me that was unnecessary, and I added I'd picked an early week to accommodate her boyfriend's move-in date. If she was going to be petty about the whole thing, so was I. We didn't speak, even the day that I moved. We and some friends packed everything up, stuck it in the truck, and were moved into our new place by nightfall. The next morning, I received the fated invoice request from Brandy and breathed a sigh of relief. She requested only my 1/2 of every utility, including the gas bill, and then deducted the cost of the Wi-Fi and my last week of rent. I finally had a win. There is one more little happy ending here. A few weeks prior to the move, a friend got me in touch with a lady who ran a shelter from her home for feral cats and kittens. I offered to donate the toys and food I had bought for the kitten I originally brought home because it made me so sad to look at them. I ended up donating some extra litter and food as well because I just really love cats. When I went to drop them off, she introduced me to a feral mom cat who had just had a litter of kittens. She offered to let me meet them and I said yes. She put the runt of the litter, a tiny little tortoiseshell, in my arms, who proceeded to crawl up my arm and play in my hair. I was in love instantly. 2 months later, my boyfriend and I brought the tortoiseshell kitten and her brother, who has been on and off my lap while I type this out, to their forever home with us at our new apartment. We've been spoiling them with nonstop love and affection ever since. My boyfriend and I are so happy together in our new home. He kind of saved me by suggesting we move in together, and I couldn't be more grateful. I love him, our cats, and my life so much now. It was honestly kind of emotional writing this whole thing out. It was sort of a traumatic experience. But I'm so happy where my life is right now. I haven't spoken with Brandy since I moved out, and honestly, I don't care to. I hope for her sake she's well, and that she grew up because, dear God Almighty, she needs to grow up. Wow, what a roller coaster of a story. Brandy sounds like a nightmare of a roommate. I can't believe she charged the author for Wi-Fi she wasn't even providing, and then had her steal from their neighbor's Wi-Fi. And then refusing to let the author get a cat because her own cat already lived there? That's just ridiculous. I'm glad they finally got out of there and got to donate some supplies to help feral cats and kittens.